Okay, so one of the most commonly asked questions that I get from students is, how do I study? Which, kind of feels, kind of vulnerable, right? Because you're in college and a lot of people feel like, oh, I already know how to study. So it doesn't even come up until after the first exam, maybe sometimes till the second exam. So I want to hit that early where we address how to study at a college level because it is different than how to study in like a K through 12. So with that being said, walk us through the study cycle.
Cool. So the study cycle is essentially a cycle that is more or less complicated depending on what you're looking to do. But ultimately, all of learning is really just some form of like previewing, doing the thing, and then reviewing. So if we're thinking about the study cycle and that preview stage, we want to think beyond just like when I'm actually sitting down to study, but sitting down to studying as part of this larger piece of learning, which includes like going to class and things like that. So the first stage of the study cycle is really like previewing what is going to happen in class. That might be doing like some pre-reading or pre-assignments, but it could also just be like taking a look at the syllabus and saying, what is the topic that we're talking about today? Are we talking about the limbic system or are we talking about bones, right? Like that's going to be a very different conversation, presumably.
They are very different.
Those are two random anatomy things that I
was very proud of limbic system. That was a good one.
Yeah, I've been thinking about, I'm not even going to say that because I'm going to embarrass myself by not knowing where it is. Sit in the brain.
It's a brain.
Okay.
You got it.
So previewing, right? Like what are we actually going to talk about? If your professor has lecture slides or anything that they provide you in advance, you don't have to spend hours doing it, just like a couple minutes skimming through, getting the big headers. One of the things I encourage students to do is write themselves, I call it a treasure map, because I have 5,
That's okay.
But like take a look at what you're going to be doing and write down some questions or some main concepts that you're pretty sure you're going to need to know and just put them at the top of your notes. And if you can actually turn them into questions, like, for example, a good one would be like, where is
the limbic system? I know that's what you're not.
That you're actually building yourself a roadmap for your class time. And so even if you're in a class that is not super active, maybe it is a little bit more of a lecture style, you can be more actively engaged because your brain is looking for something.
Yeah.
And brains love to have jobs. When they don't have jobs, they make up jobs for themselves.
Yeah.
And those jobs are not always the jobs.
No. What is that person watching on their computer? And what is it here? Yeah.
Right. And so if you can give your brain a job into answering these questions that you've built for yourself, you're more likely to be tuned into what's going on.
Yeah. And gamify it. And it actually is priming, if we want to get technical, it's priming the thalamus. So the thalamus is the part that's in charge of directing information. And so you're kind of like pointing to the thalamus, like, hey, when you hear that word, like really make sure we find that.
I feel like that's like why we look up things on Google Maps before we start driving, or at least I do, because when I'm in I need to be like, what am I vaguely going to be looking for? And I'm more likely to make that turn than if I'm just like waiting for the lady to tell me what to do. Like
I blindly follow and not gonna lie.
It's like a style thing, I guess. So we'll control it. So part 1 of the study cycle is like preview things before class. Part 2 is like go to class. And this, feels silly. Like we have to tell you to go to class, but like honestly, go to class, right? Like that is such a huge part, if nothing else, because the more you hear something, the more likely you are to remember it, right? You can think about like the first time you hear that new song on the radio, you're like, I don't know what this is. I don't know any of these words. And by like the 3rd or 4th time, you're like, I know all the words. I can jam along. Like that is what we're doing with information. Is the more spaced repetitions we can get. So previewing is 1 repetition, being in class and hearing it is another repetition. After class, real quickly, even just in like a 3-minute thing, review what you've done in class, right? Go through your notes. Did you answer all your questions from your treasure hunt? This is really important, like especially if you're in a class where you tend to write shorthand. So like this is in the sciences, this is in the humanities. Like I was a humanities student, so I didn't have all these equations that I needed to learn, but I had a lot of vocabulary that was like really similar. So in my notes, I would write like COMM, com, and I'd be like, I totally know what that's going to mean later. And then I'd get back to my notes and be like, is that communication? Is that community? Is that communism?
Wow.
Because, when you're in a class about Marxist theory, like all of those things are possible. And so sometimes I'd be like, what com is that? So like right after class, go in and maybe like if there's an acronym or something that you wrote down, like just make a little note of like what that means, or like even just a like big question mark of like, what the heck is this I didn't understand, so that you have that like immediate feedback. Then you're going to take that and go to study, right? And so you'll do your studying. You want to do active learning. We can talk about.
Yeah, we'll do that in a second video. Yeah, that's going to be a whole
later. But then you're doing your active study session, and then you then want to review once more, right? Like, and you sort of bumps you into like, okay, I've done my studying. Now I'm, what did I learn, and how am I getting prepped for the next concept? And that pops you back into the front of previewing.
And then I love what you said about like the after class. I want to tie in also as an instructor, how that can work with me. And so what I would do as a student is when I went back through them, okay, also there was the ones where I didn't realize I didn't finish writing the whole sentence.
Yeah.
Like some professor, they moved on, they answered a question, I fell asleep.
Right.
So I would have half sentences, and I wouldn't always catch that in the moment. So going back, kind of finding those in the book, but then I would also take Post-it notes and fill out things that maybe I didn't have the full concept down, or I wasn't really sure what the abbreviation was. And I made all these little notes, and then I would go to the professor's office hours, and then I would ask them, okay, I was a little confused on this one. And so it's a really good chance for you to kind of come into office hours really prepped for what you want to have accomplished during those times. So that's one end from a professor perspective. But also coming into class prepared, we're going to ask questions. And so if you want to get the most out of that hour or 2 hours or however long you're in class, by coming in with some preset ideas of what we're going to be talking about, you can be one of the people that are answering the questions and getting more feedback and kind of getting more engagement in the process of class.
Yeah. Or even coming in with questions that you have, right? Like, okay, I know here, if you've got your treasure map of questions and you're listening and your professor is like clearly moving on to the next topic, and you're like, wait, I'm pretty sure this is going to be important because of like it's bolded in the slides, but I still don't understand that. That's a really great trigger to like raise your hand in the moment if you're feeling brave. I know sometimes that's not what you want to be doing, but also then, like you said, being able to take that with you to office hours. And we encourage students to go to office hours all the time. And sometimes even just getting in the door is the victory. And that's great. If you're just showing up and you're like, I'm confused, or I don't know what I don't know, that's good. But if you can come with like a targeted, even just like, here's a concept, doesn't even have to be like a real specific question. It's so much easier, one, for us to help you. If you walk into my office and sit down and you're like, I feel like I'm not understanding things, I'm going to ask you about 14 questions to get to the place where we might actually be able to help you. If you can have done a little bit of pre-thinking of like, here's a concept, or here's an acronym or a term or whatever that I don't understand, we're going to be able to get into that faster and be able to get you more out of the session and office hours in less time. Not that we're trying to like rush you out the door, but we do want to make it a meaningful time. And that's not just like, okay, we're going to spend 20 minutes trying to figure out what it is that you don't understand. If you can come having done a little bit of that pre-work, you're going to get more time with the professor actually doing the work to figure out what you don't understand.
So thank you for discussing the whole cycle. I think it's really helpful because I think sometimes we overlook that. We're just kind of like, oh, it's just studying. But no, it's a whole process, which is really important.